Our guest today is Michael Allosso, a master communications expert who coaches CEOs and entrepreneurs on their day-to-day leadership skills. Michael is a top-rated Vistage International speaker traveling the world bringing his You on Your Best Day program to organizations and businesses. He's also a former drama teacher and former artistic director with numerous theaters in the Boston area. As an actor, Michael also appeared in the feature film Panther Two alongside Steve Martin and has also appeared in many commercials and corporate films. I personally had the opportunity to attend Michael's session You on Your Best Day several years ago, and it has had a profound impact on my communication style. Today we talk about how leaders can be their best authentic selves by being intentional about their micro-messaging, and how structure frees creativity. Hope you're ready for a very dynamic conversation. Here we go. Well, Michael, welcome to the Entrepreneurs United podcast. I'm so excited to have you on today, and having seen you in person a few years ago with our entrepreneurial organization, I was really excited to kind of, hash it around with you a little bit today on how entrepreneurs can be the best on their best day, and look forward to having you with us. Can you tell us, maybe to start off, what you've done in terms of, I know you talked to a lot of Vistage groups, a lot of CEO groups, and have been really aiding businesses for several years on their communication styles and of like. So can you please share that a little bit with us today?
Mon plaisir, Monsieur Saint-Pierre, for sure. Yes. I don't know if you remember this about me, John, but I started as a high school drama teacher.
Yep.
And so I started my career as a high school drama teacher, segued into professional theater and film, and kind of accidentally found myself in the lap of entrepreneurs, executives, CEOs, presidents, vice presidents. Everything I do is built around authenticity. How do I make a CEO, a group of people, authentic, their best authentic self? And so the avenue for that is the same avenue that I used in training actors, in directing plays, and directing film. So much of that is how they work well with the team, how they lead the team, and their heightened self awareness. What I learn every day, John, is that people are not self aware. It's why actors need directors. Rarely does an actor direct the vehicle that he or she is in.
Yeah.
Anytime I've ever done that in my career, my wife looks at what I directed and says, "Oh my gosh, did you need a director? Man, like someone needed to rein you in, brother."
Yeah.
Yet we all need that other eye. So I am that eye. So what I do with executives is it's the general categories are leadership, communication, self-awareness. And it's the perfect storm of those three. How can you make a difference in every life you touch? So it's a combination of outside in and inside in coaching in large groups. So I do keynotes of 1,000 people all the way down to one-on-one coaching, always with the same universal theme. What are the things you're doing that are successful and excellent? How can you do them more so that you make a bigger impact on those people that are following you? And where are your weaknesses? How do we get rid of those weaknesses and instead put something in the toolbox that works to lift people rather than destroy people?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to dive right into the topic of, being an actor or a director versus being a CEO in an entrepreneurial organization. What are some of those similarities that exist that's transferable?
One of the first things I do when I do a keynote or a workshop is after the Jean St. Pierre person introduces me and says, "Here's this actor director guy, Michael Allosso." And I watch everyone in the room have a group eye roll saying, "Why on earth is this dude speaking in a business setting?" One of the first questions I ask are, "What are some of the skills and talents you associate with actors at the top of their game?" And I have no PowerPoint, I write them on a flip chart.
Yep.
And John, the audience says things like confidence, empathy, adaptability, vocal skills, nonverbal communication, body language, the ability to connect with an audience, charisma, presence. So we make that gigantic list. And then I turn to the audience every single time and I say, "All right, if we were making a list of skills and talents you need to be outstanding in what you do every day, what would you want to lose?" And the answer always is the same: zero.
Yep.
We are actors. As long as you understand that acting has nothing to do with pretense. Look it up in the dictionary. Some Webster's has the fifth or sixth preferred definition. Acting comes from the root action, to do, to perform, not to pretend. Now, we call actors who pretend unemployed. We don't hire them. So that list is all about verbal, nonverbal, self awareness, confidence blended with humility, that ability to adapt, the ability to improvise. All those things are on the list, and we work on all of them.
Yeah. So, what are some of the keys? I know that you talk about leadership, communication, and self awareness, three big keys. And I would agree with you, even individually myself, being self aware sometimes. And certainly, if you hear yourself or you watch yourself on video, you get a different perception of maybe what you're actually putting out there. So what are some keys for entrepreneurs that to increase their heightened self awareness? What are some keys for that that entrepreneurs listening to this podcast could really execute?
Authenticity requires intentionality. The mistake we make is that we equate authenticity and believability with being natural.
Mm.
John, do you ever call someone out on their behavior and they say, well, I'm just being myself? And they're being discourteous,
Yeah.
rude, arrogant. No, if you tell me your life partner is the most important person in your life, and at the end of this interview, you go home, you check your emails, you check your snail mail, get a snack, and then 45 minutes later, check in on your life partner to see how they're doing. I'm going to tell you either you're lying about who your authentic self is, or with intentionality, you must choose the micro messages that connote that authentic self. So, the first and logical answer to your question is a heightened self awareness about the micro messages that you send. And because of my director's eye, I'm so used to, in a compacted amount of time, finding all the things you're doing well and the things you need to do better. What I've developed is, whether there are 1,000 people in the room or I'm doing a one on one, I'm telling people how they're coming across.
Hmm.
I'm giving them authentic feedback to heighten their self awareness. Now, if you're crossing your arms, sneering and swearing, and I tell you those micro messages are associated with arrogance and disrespect, and you say, yeah, that's what I'm going for, then we're great. Then you are creating intentional behavior to create your authentic self.
Yeah.
But if you think you're cheering your team on and you're being analytical and processing the wonderful things they say and showing them respect, then you're going to have to explore other micro messages so that with intentionality, you create that authentic person. So first and foremost, intentionality. Secondly, it's this word we call objective. John, what I find is most people don't stop to ask, what is your objective? So I have this thing I call the 35 secret weapons to help you be you on your best day.
Yeah.
And secret weapon number 16 is objective. And the way we define objective in theater is desired result, takeaway. What do you want the audience to do at the end of your meeting? Not to feel, not to think. What do you want them to do? And so when I ask myself that question, that is a way I can get in the zone and create that authentic behavior. If I don't ask myself that question, then it's left to serendipity.
Hmm.
Who knows what my behavior is going to be? But if I decide my objective of this interview is to give John's audience a minimum of 2 ways to upgrade the way they communicate and lead every day as entrepreneurs, as intrapreneurs, then that helps me focus with clarity and hold myself accountable for the behavior I do in this meeting.
Yeah.
Now, secret weapon 17 to support that is tactics. So if I decide that's my objective, then the next question I have to ask either my client or myself is, how are you going to do that?
Yeah.
And the answers are my tactics. And we say answers plural, John,
Yeah.
so that we call that tactical variety. And what too many people do in presentations is their only tactic is to show slides and disseminate information.
Yeah.
Smiling's a tactic. What you just did, nodding your head's a tactic. Humor's a tactic.
Yeah. It's interesting. I love the acting is action, not pretending. Absolutely love that. And also, parallel to that is being your best authentic self isn't just being natural; it's being intentional about who you want and what your objective is. And I certainly think that one of the things, from our conversations in the past that really was heightened for me was the micro messaging and your distinct ability as a director and the trained eye to be able to look. And I can remember distinctly looking at, so maybe somebody in our group who was wearing a bracelet as an example, and that means something to that person, right? It could be a breast cancer bracelet, or it could be a gold bracelet showing something different. Can you talk to us a little bit about how entrepreneurs should be looking at their micro messaging and how they are messaging to their group with intentionality and objective, and how maybe some of the things that they do may be sending the wrong message that you may have seen in the past? That, I'm assuming that if someone has an objective of this and they're trying to intentionally do this, but their micro messaging is saying something different, that causes a conflict in their team's eyes.
Dr. Albert Morabian, this maybe was 60 years ago, John, psychologist, said that only 7% of communication is content. The other 93% is everything you and I have been talking about. It is whether you smile or not. It is that bracelet you're talking about. It's a car you drive. Do you walk in the morning, go directly to your office, do not pass go, do not say hello, do not collect $200, micro message. You walk in the morning, say hello to people, call them by name, ask them how their night was, micro message. When I announce the objective, do you write it down? Micro message. All these things are micro messages. And there's lots of paradoxes with this. Micro messages can lie because right now you're smiling and nodding. So we assume that you are affirming and are with me. Well, you might be smiling and nodding because you're having really bad gas pains right now. So what I work on is you can't just take one micro message from a person. You have to take a collection, an amalgam. But here's more paradoxes, John. Sure, I do that as an awareness specialist, and I'm asking you to do that as a leader. Do your people do that? Does your family do that? And any one micro message you send, they're going to respond to. And they often go to the lowest common denominator.
Yeah.
So the idea is that you have to, whatever that lowest common denominator is, they're going to respond to it. So that you have that frown on your face and you say that's the way you process. Well, be ready that they're going to take it as judgmental. But I'm asking you to do the exact opposite. I'm asking you to think of your team. If they're sitting there, don't assume they're not with you. John, I tell you, these workshops I've done all over the world, very often, this isn't even an occasional thing. The person who is scowling at me the most is the most interested person in the room.
Yeah.
So micro messages can lie. That's why awareness is so important. That if you're really trying to boost the confidence of a subordinate, of an associate who's doing a presentation for your approval, and you don't nod, you don't smile, you run the risk of obfuscating their excellence. So remember, I told you there's objectives and tactics. Secret weapon number 18, to further answer your question, is called obstacle. So one thing that helps my client base is I often tell them, you know what? You're not playing your objective. You're playing the obstacle. So think about it, John. If you're in my play and I hand out the scripts, and on the first day you read your character says your character is drunk. And so you come in the first scene and you go, "Good morning, everybody. How are you?" I'd say, "Ugh, John, what are you doing?" And you'd say, "Well, it says the character is drunk." John, when you're drunk, what usually is your objective? What are you usually trying to make people think?
He
tries to make
that you're
people
sober.
I'll
No.
tell you what I'll tell you, in all my experience with John, I can tell you what he tries to make people think.
What, Mr. Hoffman?
He is the funniest, wittiest, most charming man in the room, and he's right.
Well, and Mr. Hoffman and Mr. St. Pierre, you are both correct. Notice neither of you said your objective is to make the other person think you're drunk.
Yeah.
It's usually to make them think you're sober, to make them think you're charming.
Yep.
When you play drunk, it's what I call playing the obstacle. So what I find is that some entrepreneurs play the obstacle. They want to challenge me and say, well, you say be authentic. My back hurts today. Well, that's not, yes, your back authentically hurts. That's the obstacle. That's the authentic obstacle. So, what I encourage people to do is not play the obstacle, play the objective. You don't play that, oh, my business has been hurt by COVID. That's the obstacle. You play the objective. How do I get my team to adapt, to pivot so we can deal with this?
That's a great
And
example.
people who turn obstacles into opportunities are successful. People who play the obstacle, they never get around to playing the objective, so they're unsuccessful.
You know, you had mentioned the work of Albert Moravian, and you had referenced a 7% in 93. I know he further breaks it down into 53, 38, 7, or 55, 38 and 7. I'd be curious on the 55, which is body language, and the 38, which is usually the tone or how you use your voice. What tips do you have on the 55% of communication with body language that leaders, we're all in the communication business. What can we learn about body language? And I'd love to get your thoughts on what can we learn about how we use our voice.
Rich, I am super impressed that you knew how that 93% broke down. You are such a show off, Mr. Hoffman. That is excellent. And that shows your excellent preparation for the interview. Good for you, Rich. And even if you looked it up this second, I don't care. It's the idea is that you come. See, what you just did, Rich, is a major micro message. You paid attention to me, you listened to me, you heard a name I said, and you validated it. So if I'm on your team, Rich, I'm going to feel valued by you. I'm going to feel my leader listens to me, my leader cares about what I'm saying, and he collaborates with me. You're not just working on your own interview questions. So your objective is to maximize the performance of Michael Allosso to enlighten your listeners. If you don't pay attention to me and what I say and refer back to what I say, and you read questions on automatic pilot, that's going to obfuscate the success of your objective. So you just modeled excellence for me. Both of those categories, or I could do a whole seminar in each. Body language, there's so many, again, what I call them are universal truths. For example, crossing your arms. So, Rich, we call where your heart is, the corazon, the power center in theater. So, a lot of people now are doing most of their communication virtually. Well, now think about it. We're on a little rectangle. You have to bring your hands into the rectangle. If you don't, you're a disembodied torso. You lose all your focus, all your emphasis, all your energy. So, the more you bring your hands to the power center, the more confident you appear, the more poised, the more energetic. These are positive things you want to do. Crossing arms and sitting. Now, many people, when I call them on this, they'll say, well, I'm cold. All right, fine if you're cold, but you're cold, you're frowning, and you're putting your nose up. You got to pick some positive traditional micro message. You got to nod, you got to do something. So when you close off the power center, Rich, we generally associate this with, no, I'm not collaborative. No, I'm not interested. And so these are things to be careful of. And again, if you choose to sit when you're in the frame, there's limited mobility. Once you start standing up, the more, a lot of people want to put their hands in their pockets. So this, even without seeing my face, you can see hands in pockets, one hip. Yeah, the guy doesn't care, and, so I have stuff in my pockets. It's equally annoying. This looks like, yeah, I'm Mr. Casual. You don't really matter to me. Hands behind back. Even this is great that you can't see my head. You see with the body? We associate this with the military. This is at ease in the military. So what this offers is a respectful, obsequious place. Great for listening, not so great for speaking. So I call them, Rich, universal truths, micro messages that we traditionally associate. And so that's in all that 55%. With camera work, notice that the people who lean in to the camera, we generally associate them with someone who's connected with us, someone who wants to collaborate. Whereas people who go back here, You can see, and I can show you books and history books where there are people who sit like this are kings who are getting their feet washed by servants. I'm in rooms where CEOs are sitting like that during a meeting while either I'm presenting or their associate is presenting. So those are some examples of that 55%, Rich. The 38%, the vocal, secret weapon number 3 is breathing. Mozart said, it's not just the notes that makes the music, it's the space between the notes. And so what I'm finding, Rich, is many of my clients, when I meet them, have no spaces between the notes. So they become vocally homogenized. And especially on virtual, anything we talk about, Rich, in person, all those deficiencies get exaggerated on Zoom and virtual media. So any deficiency you have in person, magnified on the virtual. In both venues, we need to add rests. Because as soon as you take a breath, the next thing out of your mouth is totally different. And so what we all have to do, dynamics in music means some things get louder, some things get softer. Some things get higher, some things get lower. Some things get faster, some things get slower. When you add a breath, you add dynamics. Because the next thing out of your mouth after a breath is automatically different. And you see why, remember, if I go to a play, Rich, hour and 10, hour and 15 minutes, intermission, I sit there. TV, I go to the bathroom after 7 or 8. So your vocal heterogeneity, you're homogenized, I'm gone. I've dozed off, I'm multitasking already. Did I understand your question, Rich, or did you look
thank you for that. I took a course from Tarot International that was a 2-day training course called Impact, How to Speak Your Way to Success, that speaks about some of the 55, 38, and 7 and have a whole training class. I don't want to bore our listeners with it, but I'd love to connect with you offline on it and cross-reference some of the notes that I took there with some of your recommendations from acting. I think that would be fascinating.
Sounds awesome. Sounds fascinating to me too, Rich. Love to do that.
You know, one of the things that we've had improv trainers into CertaPro. I invited one in actually in, I think it was 2012. I created a sales boot camp. And for those that graduated the sales boot camp, what they got as a reward was a private acting class from an improv trainer in Las Vegas. And they absolutely loved it. They had no idea what they were signing up for, but they loved what they got. One of the tools that we learned from now having multiple improv trainers in is yes and that is a very common thing, and that can be used in business where someone says something, instead of saying yeah but, you would confirm what they're saying authentically, assuming it's confirmable, and saying yes and layering onto it. So that's absolutely one tactic that I'm familiar with from that. I'm curious, do you have another 2 or 3 kind of bullet point tactics that you could train John and me on, or we could even practice, or our listeners can learn about improv and how it can be used in communication and leadership?
Of course, but you have not defined for your listeners accurately enough what yes and means. Because yes and is, in other words, listeners, in improv, if Rich and I are doing an improv and I in the improv say, ooh, there's a spider on your shoulder. What Rich can't do is say, no, there isn't. Because as soon as he says that, it's what we call negating the improv. You know, when you teach kids improv drama, little kids, they sometimes start negating the improv. And what you have to teach them to do is yes and. So what yes and means is, oh yeah, that's my friend Billy. I carry him with him everywhere. Or yes and is, get up. Yes and means I accept what you have. So yes and is loaded with arteries and subsets. To just place it and say that's a concept, it's many, many concepts. It has to do with access creative energy quickly. And what happens with yes and, Rich, the negative of yes and is that it applauds fast processors. So improv by its very nature makes the fast processors on the team feel like big shots. So the best improv training that I do is when I embrace the slow processors as much as the fast processors.
Mm.
Most improv really makes us, and I'm a fast processor and you are too, so that makes us really rise to the top of the class, and it makes the slow processors feel like their contribution is less valuable. And that's not accurate. Have you read Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, Rich?
Yes.
Yeah. So you know exactly what I'm talking about. So often we need a slow processor on the team who's going to take that information, digest it, and then come to a conclusion. Now, the thing that you said about no but is super important. And so let's elaborate that for your listeners. I find that occurs the most in feedback giving. In other words, I find a lot of my client base saying, Rich, you're very excellent with telling stories about what your team did. But you know what? You have to be clearer when you explain yes and, because you didn't do a good job in explaining that. So we all know what our associate hears when we say that. They don't hear the first part at all because they know we mean everything after the but. So why that basic premise of improv carries over so beautifully, even though it's a slightly different shade, is that what we're trying to get entrepreneurs, CEOs, leaders to do is say and. Rich, I love that you brought up yes and instead of but. And I'd love for you to explain it more carefully to your listeners. So now the first part of my sentence is not negated. Now I did authentically mean that. I am pleased that Rich brought that up, and I'd like him to get into it with more detail. And so substituting and for but is a huge subset of that. Another thing that we do, because really what improv is all about, why I do improv seminars with my executives, is to heighten listening. What improv is all about is listening. And if you go on automatic pilot, you can't do improvs. If I decide ahead of time the character I'm going to be before you do it, I lose. So what it's all about is heightened listening. So Rich, a subset of that is what I call the echo. What I'm finding works best when I coach people how to coach is for the coach to repeat what the client has said.
Repeat what the client said.
There you go, Rich, but not quite so snarky as you just did. And so they would say, Michael, I want to make sure I understood what you said. You're asking me to be a parrot like that. And then I would say, thank you for pointing that out to me, Rich. No, I don't mean exactly that. I don't mean for you to be snarky and do it. I mean for you to genuinely make sure you got what they said. Because, Rich, here's what happens. You can imagine with my experience, no false modesty here, I am a copious note taker. So when you say something, I write it down word for word. I don't rely on my memory. And so when I come back and say, I heard you say, all right, maybe I'm not 100% effective, but I'm at 98.8%. Do you know how often, Rich, the other person says, no, I didn't say that? Now, what I have to resist, my trigger, I have to resist. Yes, I did, you idiot. I can prove it to you. It's right here. Because that's not going to help me win my objective. So I say, I'm sorry that I misunderstood you. Help me to understand. Because what do they really mean, Rich? They don't mean that's not what I said. What do they mean?
Not what I meant.
Not what I meant, right,
Yeah.
John? And the beauty, instead of being snarky parrot, the beauty of the repetition is to give the person another chance to really say what they meant. Because we jump too quickly to conclusions. And that's a potential negative of improv training, is that we're taught to be these fast processors and immediately respond. That's talking, listening, go. That is good. And let's value the slow processor. So a good improv class, and probably yours was, would offer opportunities for slow processing kinds of things well, where people could go off in huddles, work on something and bring it back. Fast processing, though, whether we like it or not, is deified in the workplace. That people like you and me are perceived as being smarter, and that's not necessarily true.
Michael, I'd love to get your recommendation on kind of the opposite of effective listening. I was in a meeting recently where one person was presenting and someone else had said, oh, here's what you're saying, and they were going to elaborate on that. And the other person said, those aren't my words. And what would be a way when you feel like your words have been taken out of context to interrupt that or correct that is received well by others?
Remember I said, Rich, that confidence was on that actor list? The parallel word that needs to be on the same line as confidence is humility. To me, they're the exact same thing. See, if you have all confidence without humility, how are you going to be perceived?
Arrogant?
Arrogant. Well, that's not really good. However, if you have all humility without confidence, how are you going to be perceived?
Meek?
Meek. So neither of those are entrepreneurs. Neither of those adjectives are what we want your listening audience to do. So what top entrepreneurs, top leaders, top motivators do is those words are in the same line at the same moment. And so when that situation happens, when someone assumes that what someone meant, what I think is happening is they're erring too much on the confidence and not enough on the humility. So arrogance comes in. So the way to handle that is through genuine questions. Did I understand correctly? What I've gotten in the new habit of doing, Rich and John, that's really working, that I recommend for your listeners, and I'm not even sure that I probably knew I was doing it, but in this morning's seminar, I had a group of leaders in the home building industry, and I said, this was our second meeting, second workshop, 20 people on the screen. And I said, what's something you took away from the first workshop? And she said to me, she was the first one to speak. She said, this thing that I learned from you last time is my favorite thing. I've been doing it all the time. And it's this thing when someone asks you a question after you explain it, first of all, you give multiple answers. You don't just give one. And then she said, every single time you did that, you said, did I understand your question? Did I answer the question that you wanted me to answer? And she said she had never done that before. And she's now, and her team had called her arrogant, and she's not. She's as lovely as the day is long. And she said, it's working like crazy. And so there's an example of her intentionality. She added the humility piece so she's smart. She doesn't just listen to what I say, she watches what I do. I didn't say to do that in my list of things to do. I do it all the time. So there's this book, Rich, called Parent Effectiveness Training, PET by Dr. Gordon. You're going to whip it out. Mr. Hoffman. Mr. Hoffman, you are I cannot believe, Rich. Rich is now, you look at this. This is my favorite image of the day. Holy Mother of Christmas. You are, Mr. Hoffman, you're making me smile ear to ear. Certa Pro, here I come. Yeah, and so for those who don't know PET, Parent Effectiveness Training, Dr. Gordon says we're supposed to ask our kids questions. And similarly, we as leaders are supposed to ask questions. Now, the mistake we make, Rich, is that we ask rhetorical questions. Like, don't you think you should make your bed now, John? Well, there's a question mark at the end of it. Technically, it's a question, but I'm telling John to go make his bed. Question is, all right, John, you want to stay up late and watch movies with us tonight? Means you're going to sleep late in the morning and miss your online math class. What's your solution for making up the online math you're going to miss by watching the movies with us tonight? I don't know the answer. John has to come up with it. Similarly, if we have that innocence, the innocence of a child, the innocence of a non-rhetorical question, that motors that interaction. Mr. Hoffman, what else are you going to whip out in there? Are you going to have programs from plays that I directed next?
Well, listen, I have a question for both of you because I have a little bit of maybe a challenge or a misunderstanding that I want to clarify. So one of the things you guys talked about, Rich, you did an improv for your company, right?
Yeah.
Thinking, hey, this is going to help people think on their feet and things of that nature. And Michael, you talked a little bit about if you were doing an improv session, that sometimes it's not fair because the fast processors may rise to the top and the slow processors not. I found personally in my own development career-wise that even though I could process fast, that I was better processing slower intentionally Because the leader who always wants to come up with the answer for their team and tell them what they should be doing versus saying, well, you know what do you guys think we should do? Or when asked a question, can I think about that and get back to you tomorrow? I was incapable of doing that in my younger career. I always wanted to give him the answer and look like the hot shot, but it created waves along the way. And I did look arrogant by answering every question, always having an answer for something. And I found personally that even though you can process fast, that is not an ideal way to process as a CEO, entrepreneur, leader of people. That you should object from an objective perspective, use a tactic to, even if you process fast, to demonstrate a slow process and give the person the respect of the time and thinking before you get back to them. How do
I
you
would
guys feel
love
about
to.
that?
I'd love to give you a thought on it, and then I welcome even being contradicted or trumped by you, Michael, on a thought on that. Is I don't think the problem was you were processing fast in terms of leadership. I think the problem was you thought in your younger leadership days that your job was to come up with the answer, where your job was actually to come up with the right question. If you get in a room of fast processors who are all working at the same company, they often come up with an answer to the question at hand, to come to find out that it was a wrong question. So the leader in the room who's a fast processor, processing fast isn't the issue if you're processing fast about honing in on answering the right question as a group versus coming up with the answer.
When I was a young director, I used to walk in, John, and tell everybody what to do. I had it all planned out. I had all the answers. I knew when they were supposed to sit, when they were supposed to stand. Now I go in and say, what do you think the character would do? So why do you think, John, I did that when I was a young director? Low self-esteem. It's the only way I knew to assume authority. Now, I don't know if that's true in your case. What I will say, what I'm always suspicious of is any training that suggests one size fits all. And that's why I always believe you have to throw lots of things on the wall because you don't know who's hearing what. So, for example, your issue, I've had clients that were the exact opposite. In other words, they're constantly slow processing because they're chicken. They're afraid to own their visceral intuitive thought, which is wonderful. They don't trust it. And by the way, this often happens with issues of gender and youth. That if a boomer male, white male does that, well, everything's cool. When young women especially do that in the workplace, there's all sorts of discrimination. All of a sudden, patronizing behavior fosters in the workplace. So for my young female clients, I suggest they don't do that. I suggest that they come up and trust with that confidence, with a visceral, assertive response where they stick the landing. But that's not true of all my young female clients. So that's why you have to customize coaching. So for you, that was good work for you. You need to work on that. For some people, I insist that they do the improv and do the fast processing so that they see that if they fail, it's not going to be horrible, that failure is all relative, and they're afraid to fail. What most improv training is about risk taking, so that you believe that you can make a mistake and recover from it. Because you guys get paid the big bucks not because you're perfect, but because when you make a mistake, you know how to recover.
Yeah.
And many people are afraid to recover because they think perfection is expected from them. Notice that wasn't on the actor list, perfection. I've hired those actors. They're good. They live in B plus, B minus.
Yeah.
That's not what we're looking for here.
Yeah.
Your listening audience, we're looking for people who are at the top of their game. That means they fail. That means they do that improv class and they do look foolish once or twice.
Sure.
But to me, a great improv class is going to go so quickly from thing to thing to thing that they don't have time to perseverate on that failure, because the next exercise that the improv leader creates is one that they're going to be successful at, because there's a smorgasbord, a variety of exercises, and not just playing into one strength. Does that, did I misunderstand the spirit of your question, John?
No, I think that's great. I think for me personally, talking about confidence and humility, and if that's something you intentionally want to display, that's your objective. I have found for me as an entrepreneur to be my best authentic self with that objective is to intentionally slow process, even though I might be able to fast process something. That has worked for me. And I find when I do that, I display more confidence, humility, in that vein. So I really love that. And I think it kind of goes a little bit, Michael, to something that I got from our meetings together that I never forgot, which was you assume actors and acting, it's all about creativity. And the one thing you said that always stuck with me was no, it's the structure that creates or frees creativity. Excuse me, the structure frees creativity. And what we talk about here, really, when you think about being your best authentic self and those 35 secret weapons, it's all about that structure that really gives someone a framework to be authentic about what they're trying to be objective about. Can you talk a little bit more about just that structure frees creativity and why that's the case?
I am so proud of you that you remembered that and quoted that.
Thank you.
It speaks to your excellence. If you're doing that as a leader with your team, man, are people feeling valued. Bravo, sir. John, that was great. It's in Bill Ball's book called The Sense of Direction. And it's a book about directing professional theater. Why on earth would I bring that into a leadership program? He has this one little tiny 3-word sentence that has become my mantra, which you quoted accurately, John. It's structure frees creativity. The more structured you are, the more creative you can be. And that is very counterintuitive to many people, because many people think structured people are boring people who sit in cubicles and do what they're told, and creative people are whack jobs like Michael Allosso who run around singing and dancing. Myth. If I took you all to the professional theater tonight, please let it open soon. If the actors were on their A game, they should look like they're making it up as they go. How do they get to that point?
I'm assuming structure.
Those 3 words, John.
Right?
Practice, practice, practice. If they weren't practiced, you would see all the work. You see them saying, where am I supposed to stand now? What are my lines? The practice makes it organic. Athletes, everyone says Tiger Woods, the greatest natural golfer that ever lived. What did his dad have him out on the golf course when he was, 3 years old?
Yeah.
Musicians, a lot of kids want to sit down and improvise on the piano or a guitar. You can't improvise on a piano or guitar until you know chord structure, until you know where to put your hands. Parenting, if I brought all of our kids and I said, go in the corner here and do something creative, I might get some results. Or if I said, okay, go in the corner, I'm going to give you each this cardboard. I'm going to give you a red pen, a blue pen, and a black pen. And by the time the big hand's on the 12 and the little hand's on the 5, I want you to draw a picture of Rich Hoffman. The second assignment is going to yield more creative results from the children because I gave them structure. You have creative people who work for you, give them deadlines. You're good at winging it? Back it up with some structure. Back it up with a quote to open your meeting, a video to end, a this day in history, a song, a dance, a joke, a story. That level of preparation heightens, frees your creativity. Tell me what time I end, what my deliverable is, what time I start, and I'm going to be much more creative than you're saying, oh, Michael, do whatever you want. And it can go as long as you want or as short. I'm dead. I'm an amoeba.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I think it fits perfectly with you, Rich. I mean, I don't know anybody that prepares more for the things that you do. For example, when you host conferences and leadership sessions and the like. But then when I see you performing such, I haven't seen you in a while, but when I did see you in the past, your charisma and your ability to flow with the audience, right, was so strong, and no one would ever know the amount of hours and hours and hours of preparation you took to get to that point to be able to run that session, right? So it's something I know you do a lot.
Yeah, I'd say, first of all, I'm a recovering perfectionist. And I have learned to procrastinate on purpose, which is actually a book called Procrastinate on Purpose. I don't know that you even need to read the book. The title says it all. I've learned to procrastinate on purpose to shorten the amount of time I have to my deadline, because that is a natural cutoff. And the tendency that I work on and I coach other people to work on is to prepare like a madman in the time period you have. But then when it's game time, when it's show time, wing it. Trust your preparation, trust your instinct. Um, I've talked with people about a phrase that's just, it'll get messy, you'll clean it up. It doesn't matter if it gets messy. It doesn't matter if you make mistakes. You'll clean it up. Trust yourself. You've done enough preparation and you're enough to be able to bring it home at this point. So it's been a work in progress, John, on not over preparing and trusting myself when it's game day, and literally at that point, winging it, and it'll work out. Do you have experience with anything similar to that in terms of the blend, Michael, between preparation and just trust in yourself, and a recommendation on where that line is for leaders who may over trust in themselves and not prepare enough, or with leaders who over prepare and then don't trust enough?
For each 90-minute seminar, Rich, I have 37 and a half hours of material prepared. And I keep all that material in the form of very carefully sharpened arrows that I put in a quiver over my shoulder. I have a hot opening prepared and a hot close, and I know my objective. Everything else is a tap dance. I have no idea what I'm going to say when, but I'll tell you this, Rich. Everything that I say is going to be sharp and carefully crafted to serve my audience for the objective that they have asked me to prepare for. I just don't know which ones I'm going to pull out. And that's my secret sauce. I do not have a slide deck. I don't have, people say, oh, I have to cut you 10 minutes short. Are you going to have a problem with that? Heck no. I'm here to serve you. You're not here to serve me. I'm here to serve you. And that's why I made my program modular. It's called 35 Secret Weapons to Help You Be You on Your Best Day. The modular effect means that I can pick any one of those out to serve. And some 90-minute seminars, I do one of them. Some I do 10 of them. Depends on the audience. See, Rich, great presentations are not monologues. They're dialogues. Everything needs to be a dialogue. The most important word is authenticity. Monologues are inauthentic. We don't go through the life speaking monologues. We have conversations. We have dialogues. That means what you and John asked me is at least as important as anything I've prepared. But I got it all prepared. Everything's in there. I just don't know which one I'm going to use. Makes it much more fun too. My heart's always beating at the beginning of any event. And the day it's not, you won't see me anymore. I'll go do something else.
Yeah. And more importantly, I think you make everybody else's heart beat real fast when you do your opening. There's no doubt that that's an extremely lively event. And I will say, you just touched on it, you on your best day. And I can tell you, Michael, from attending your seminar, that the impact you make, whether it be the hot opening or the hot closing or really those sharp arrows, I literally, many days, not just today, but today especially because I knew you were coming on, think through that. Am I me right now on my best day? Because some of those micro messaging things, specifically, if I just come back to that, have stuck with me for a very, very long time. And I think your session makes people more aware of maybe when they're micro messaging may not be sending the right signals towards their objectives. So I really love that, and certainly would recommend your session to anybody listening to this, and certainly Rich, to people in your organization, because entrepreneurs need to be in the zone. They need, and I love what you were saying earlier about just the obstacles way too many times. And I think it's a language I'm going to start using as well, which is, yeah, you're being authentic to your obstacle, not to your objective. I really loved how you brought that together. And that's something new that you probably said in the earlier session, when we were together, but I didn't get that first time. And now I'm getting it now, and it's clicking. So I really appreciate that, because, people need to see entrepreneurs and see the micro messaging they want to display for their objectives, but still be authentic to who they are with the right intentionality. So I really appreciate the session. Can you talk a little bit more about the seminars you do give for companies, for those listening who might be interested in that and exactly what that looks like, especially now in a Zoom virtual world, and how you perform those?
Thank you for asking that, John. I appreciate it. I've been doing what I call deep dives. The beauty of the virtual world now is that I am not traveling all over the world. So prior to COVID, I was 48 out of 52 weeks on the road. So if someone asked me, are you going to organize a program where I can send one of my executives to hear you speak? The answer is no. There's just absolutely no time. You do it, you organize it, I'll show up in your city and do it. Book me. But I'm not. Well, now I am because of virtual. The whole virtual world. I've done 231 keynotes and workshops since mid to late March when I started transferring everything into virtual. I've been home 45 straight weeks today. I've had 314 straight dinners with my wife, Peggy. Not that I'm counting, but that's what I do. Now, many of these are 90 minutes long, many are 5 hours long, some are 3 hours long. Some are keynotes for 500 people. Some is a workshop for 6 people. Some of my clients are preparing a presentation for Google, and they have the 6 people that are going to be on the presentation. The 2 groups I did today were associations of executives in one industry who come together on the screen and meet regularly for enrichment, and I was speaking to them. Private company, the CEO tells me what their objective is and what their core values are. So there's 2 options right now. Friday, March 19th from 1 to 4 Eastern Standard Time is my next deep dive. Right. So on Friday, March 19th, I'll take a maximum of 18 people to come and be with me for 3 hours on the screen where I heighten their virtual excellence. Where, and often, we get the 18. Sometimes we don't. It's the whole idea is I want you to have very personalized attention. And so the first one I did 650 people in September. And then I went to 24. And so now I've cut back to 18 to give even more individualized attention. So everybody on the screen gets attention and they leave with a toolbox full of ways to heighten their virtual communication. When a company hires me, it's all people from one company. The deep dives are people from all different companies, all different levels. Some are CEO, some are vice presidents, all the way down. Same with a company. Sometimes a company has me do their executive team separate from their sales team, separate from their administrative team. Some companies want all those people together hearing the same message. That is, remember what I said earlier, John, it's not one size fits all. And it's that I'm that, because of my improv background, I'm that able to be flexible to honor whatever the commitment is. And that's what I'm teaching after all. So I can't be a hypocrite. I've got to model that. And then once I know how many hours I have, what your objective is, here goes. The premise, the commonality is that it's you on your best day. The commonality is my expectation that everyone on that screen is a leader. Even if you're the receptionist, you're the ambassador of first impressions, you're a leader. And the expectation is that everybody on the screen is CertaPro. CertaPro isn't just Rich Hoffman, it's everybody. And if Rich has made the investment for you to be on that screen, you are CertaPro. And so my expectation is that everyone walks away from the screen with the ability to be CertaPro, both in their verbal and their nonverbal. And the magic, John, is that it should be both in their home life and in their business life, that it's seamless. Yep. It's not a fake thing that you kick into. It's your best authentic self. So companies, what's been happening all through this lockdown is all these hundreds of groups that I've been able to do. CEO says, generally what it's been lately is we need to heighten our virtual presence. We need to more gracefully translate from in-person to virtual. We need to do both. Help me. And so what I do is I jam pack in whatever time they give me as many ways for people to heighten their virtual presence as I can. I talk about them, I model them, I make people do. So John, if the group's under 20, and I get 2 hours or more, everybody's performing.
Yeah.
Everybody does an exercise. If the group's 200 people and I have 55 minutes, I'm still giving them feedback, but it's from what they say in the chat. My job is to make everyone in the room feel like I'm only talking to them, because that's your job as an entrepreneur as well.
Michael, I'd love to take a step back to something I took a note on in the opening that I haven't had a chance to ask you about yet. You said something I had never heard the words put together quite this way before, was outside in and inside in. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't make that clear, Rich, because I said it wrong. It should be there's outside in coaching and inside out coaching. And so, thank you for challenging that, Rich.
That was not a challenge. I don't want to. I don't want my micro. What I want. I don't want my micro messages to be misinterpreted as a challenge. It was not a challenge. It was seeking with curiosity, going, "What is that? How does that work?" I'd still love to hear the outside in and inside out part of it.
That was a bigger micro message right there. How you got all defensive because I used the word challenge. I learned much more about you in that moment.
Well, I certainly
like the word challenge. That tells you that I just learned so much about you in that moment, Mr. Hoffman. I love being challenged. Challenge means you didn't explain this clearly enough, Mr. Allosso. I'm eager to learn. There's nothing negative about a challenge. It's quite positive. It tells me that you're viable and that you care and you're interested. I love challenges. It was interesting to see how you reacted, Mr. Hoffman. I now got the whole dossier on you. Yeah, Rich, I love that you asked this. Outside in, it's interesting. Sometimes this breaks down, Rich, by gender too. Outside in coaching is all external. So remember, I told John does some beautiful things where he nods and smiles frequently. So that is outside in coaching. That if someone on John's team said, why do you feel warmer with John than you do with me? Well, the outside in coaching would be John nods his head and he smiles. Now, many people, when I say nod your head and smile, they can't do that, Rich. They say, why? I don't understand. That seems so artificial and imposed. What do they need? Inside out coaching. So inside out coaching is more spiritual. How are you trying to make the audience feel? What is it? What is your interior monologue? Subtextually, what's happening for you? Now, Rich, why I say gender? Women I find pretty open to both. Some men are resistant to inside out. So when I do that last thing with some men, they'll say, what the heck are you saying? What do you want me to smile and nod? Why don't you just freaking tell me to smile and nod and I'll do it? And I have to respect that person. He wants outside in coaching only. He's not looking for inside out coaching. Most of God's children like both, Rich. But what I find is sometimes it depends on the mood of the person, that if you give them one when they need the other, they really don't get it and they get frustrated. They want that external fix. Show me what you want me to do, Michael. In theater, we call it the line reading. I want you to say, good morning, Michael. How are you? So what I want you to do is add a pause, lean forward, and then make your voice go up. Outside in coaching. Inside out coaching, can you make those two sentences different? So they mean two different things for you, and you have a beat change and an adjustment in the middle, so you have time to process to motivate the second one. Hi, Michael. How are you? So they're two very different styles of coaching. My guess is, Rich, you and John would be like me, liking some of both, depending upon the situation. I think most of us are, but do not demean the person who needs one more than the other, whether it be situationally or because of their personality. They deserve that kind of coaching. Did I define it specifically enough, Rich, or do you need more examples?
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, Michael, want to thank you very much for your time here today. Certainly, I've been excited for this conversation for the last couple of weeks since we booked this conversation from our sessions we had in the past. And it's amazing how, when Rich and I have talked about doing these podcasts and taking one or two things away from each speaker ourselves personally, and even the fact that I've spent some time with you before, I'm still learning more and more things because you have so many more quivers in there to really throw out. So I hope to spend more time with you. I hope others get to spend more time with you, and certainly have helped me have my best day today and complete that up. So thank you very much for your time.
What a kind, lovely thing to say, John. Thank you for that incredible feedback. And remember what Michelle Obama says: be grateful for what you have and be ready to share it when the time comes. It's Mrs. Obama's take on Luke 12. That's all it is. This is the time right now, everybody, to really strut your stuff and make a difference in people's lives. Thank you both, John and Rich. Love talking.
Thank you, Michael.
Stay with us for a few more minutes while Rich and I break down the podcast.
I loved having Michael on. I think he's brilliant when it comes to the micro messaging and picking up on multiple patterns within it. I'd love to take his class. I know he had something going on. I think it was
March 19th, 3 to 4, called the Deep Dive. I can tell you, I'm going to highly recommend it to everybody that can attend for sure. We'll send some information out along with this podcast. Rich, there's no question. I literally woke up this morning and, when he runs his full session in the deep dive on you on your best day, he literally talks about imagining that day where you get up and you're fully rested and you get your workout in. You feel so good about your workout and the birds are chirping and the sun's rising. And, what is that day and how do you have that day every day? Right? It's a fantastic session when you deep dive in, but then it's also, how are you portraying your best day with intentionality of what you really want to get? What are your objectives of that day? What are you trying to accomplish? What are the messages you're trying to send to your wife or your kids or your colleagues or your business partners or your neighbors for that matter with the micro messaging that you give? And that has been so powerful for me anyway along the way. You're right. Not only is he so strong in delivering the message about the micro messages we give, but he's incredibly perceptive as well at seeing people and where they may have gaps in the message they're trying to display versus their objectives.
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting moment where he caught me on my reaction to challenging.
Yep.
And it does make me reflect and go, well, is there something in me that, boy, I really don't like to be challenged by others? And I'm sure there is, and that may be what he was referencing. It was a bit of me feeling bad, like the majority of guests that we have, they would not want to be challenged. You're the guest, right? And he's like, no, I invite the challenge. I'm like, oh, I guess I didn't make him feel bad. So I'm still trying to figure out, what I do with the nugget of feedback, and I may even connect with him afterwards here. I love the being careful on being authentic to the obstacle. Oh my gosh, do I feel like that can happen, is authenticity to the obstacle versus being authentic to the objective. Another one that I really liked from his speaking point of view, because we do a lot of training at CertaPro, and from his speaking point of view, having what he called the hot opening, the hot closing, and he had a bunch of sharp arrows, and he knew he would be carefully crafted about how we would go about doing things, but he was 9 hours to 37 hours of material in his mind that he was ready to deliver based on reading the audience and whatever their needs were. That spoke to me quite a bit.
Yeah, which is the structure freeze creativity part that we talked about. And, certainly I found myself in many occasions where I feel like I'd jump into an improv potentially, this evening, and maybe my fast processor would get me there where I can, create something. But a lot of times, even those who have fast processors, if they're not prepared, are going to say the wrong thing, say it the wrong way, come across the wrong way. But if they have the structure and the preparation, now they can be creative. And this speaks a lot to salespeople or executives that are trying to, we heard him talk about earlier in one of our conversations, and even in the podcast, where he's talking to a sales team that's going to make a big presentation to Google. Well, why would Michael Allosso talk to a sales team that's about to make a presentation to Google? Shouldn't they be talking to the finance people or the marketing people? Or why is that important? Well, they're trying to create an impression, but if they can create the structure around that presentation, they'll be able to be creative and think on their feet when they're in front of Google, things of that nature. So I think it applies really when you think about sales reps doing sales presentations or executives trying to close a big business deal. Having that structure and preparation will free that creativity as well. So I thought I've always connected with that when I heard it from him. Because I always thought acting is pretending. And he
Right.
diffused that right out of the gate. Acting's not pretending.
It's action.
It's action. I love that.
You know, you did bring up that structure frees creativity, and you quoted them exactly right. I'm curious if you either take a moment and reflect on, or even think about in the future, is there a way that you've used that and been intentional where you did in a coaching environment or setting something up in a business where you purposefully leaned on structure to unlock creativity, or is there a way you would in the future?
Yeah, you're going to love my answer to this.
Okay.
So ever since Dr. Julie Bell, we talked about doing the 20 minutes of thinking time
Yes.
twice a week. And we went through that challenge together and accomplished it. Well, one of my objectives for 2021 and my one thing planner is to create a new habit of 20 minutes of thinking time every day. So I got myself a nice red binder and I do 20 minutes of thinking time. The problem with doing 20 minutes of thinking time every day is you open up your white piece of paper in your binder and you start thinking, well, what do I need to think about now? I thought for 20 minutes to yesterday, the day before that. And what I've used that time for is to put more structure around some of the meetings I have later that day.
Oh.
And I've shown up in the past week or two to multiple meetings where the structure and the thought process I put into my thinking time helped me be so much more effective in that meeting. And was really impressive to the people I was meeting with, going, oh my gosh, you really thought through this. When in reality, had I not had my 20 minutes of thinking time, I probably would have just showed up on the Zoom call and go, hey, what are we talking about? And so having that preparation for me has been a little bit of a game changer for me in 2021, is really thinking through 20 minutes thinking time every morning. I'm going to put my thinking time and usually think about what I have going on that day, put more structure, frees my creativity for that conversation. I'm not thinking about the deep-rooted things I had to think about earlier that day. So that's how I put that into practice a little bit, and it's really helped me. But I can see it when I'm not structured and I'm going into a business presentation. I can wing it, but I certainly don't feel comfortable, and it doesn't free my creativity. I get more rigid.
Well, it's a great example of preparation and not over-preparing. We talked about that on that particular conversation with Michael, that you take 20 minutes a day, and it's turned into doing some preparation, or maybe it's ends up being creative, either way, but it's turned into some preparation recently. But you're not taking 2 hours. You're taking 20 minutes to do preparation. And it's really enhancing what you're doing later in the day. I think that's awesome. Great example.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to go back to what you talked about just real quick in closing with obstacles. And when people are authentic to their obstacles, I almost feel like if companies could train their teams on this language, it would be extremely effective. So, for example, if you brought Michael Allosso in to talk to your team, or you're just talking to them about being authentic, but you're being authentic about how miserable you are because of that obstacle, versus being authentic, what's your objective as a leader, and being authentic around that. Yeah, you may have a bad back, but people don't want to know about your bad back. That's not the objective. The objective is, how do we get out of this COVID mess and have our business thrive, as an example. How are you being authentic to that? And I think that's where the action comes in, and that's where potentially you need to act from a creative standpoint and be on your game, be you on your best day. And I think that's what Michael can bring to organizations when he speaks to them, is really get that heightened sense of awareness on the language that can be used around it.
That's terrific.